Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, September 29th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Matt, you have a column today in the Free Press about the looming government shutdown and the Democratic responses to it. We'll talk about that a little later. I find myself after, decades of panic over government shutdowns from 1999 to 2011 to 2013 to 2020 to 2017 or 2018, whatever that was. Now it's just like another thing that happens in Washington, whereas it had never really happened before. And so I find myself unable to get excited about it, but we'll discuss whether we should be excited about it. So much going on. Meeting at the White House today between Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump, a 21-point peace plan drawn up by Steve Witkoff that I think we will see the following. Trump will say he wants it, Bibi will agree to it, Hamas will say no, and then we're back in the game where Trump will say, okay, go finish them off, and we're nowhere moved anywhere further. The only optimism in this is Trump saying, I think we have a deal, I think we have a deal, I think we have a deal. There's no indication that Hamas is anywhere near that deal. So that's issue number one, or issue number two. Issue number three.
Wait, can I just interject something?
Yeah.
You skipped the step. Trump will say he wants it, Bibi will say yes, Hamas will say no, the media will say Israel killed the deal.
Right. Fair enough. Obviously, horrendous, monstrous fire and shooting at a Mormon church in Michigan, a shooting at a kind of vacation community in Indiana just hours later, continuing feelings that America is kind of like centripetally spinning out of control, and a moment of apology, which is that when talking about the indictment of James Comey last week, I misunderstood the terms of the indictment, which is my fault because it was very unclear how they were writing about it. But these are the hazards of doing this daily podcasting on matters that are done sloppily and unclearly. Even what the administration said the indictment was about turns out not to have been what the indictment was about, and the indictment is very thin, and I thought it was more substantive. And I don't know whether you feel this way, you guys, but I do think there are these moments when, we are obliged by the nature of what we do here to, sort of offer instant opinions of things that under other circumstances and at other times we would hold fire on.
Well, John, I think you were basing your views on the reporting about the indictment of James Comey. And what makes this indictment interesting and unusual is that the reporting of the indictment has much more detail than the actual indictment of James Comey.
Right.
And so we're commenting on reports about an indictment that contains very little information. And so we're basing it off that. You were talking about the charge that Comey lied to Congress. That's true. What he was lying about, still somewhat unclear. We believe it has to do with whether he was lying about whether or not he had authorized leaks of classified information. And that is a charge. It's very nebulous, as I was saying last week. And we'll have to see if we go to trial and if the government is able to prove it or not. But I don't know who came after you, John, but I thought
no one came after me. So okay. when I read the analyses of the indictment itself by Andy McCarthy and others, I had made inferences, again, based on the accounts that you were discussing, Matt, that were simply not true, that
Right.
he was being indicted. I didn't, that the whole thing spun on whether or not Andrew McCabe had told Congress that he had been authorized to leak something, and that the word authorized is very vague, and that in fact he never said that he spoke to Comey personally. And what I thought that he had been, I thought this was then connected to a different leak, which was the notes that Comey had taken of his meeting with Trump that he gave to Columbia law professor named Richmond. And I thought it was involved with that, and it's not.
It,
And it
do
may
we know
be,
that for sure?
well, the indictment is out, and it is bad, and the prosecutor, the hastily appointed prosecutor,
Yes.
uh, the former Miss Colorado and real estate attorney, Lindsay Halligan, I think it's Halligan, uh, in a colloquy with the magistrate judge that she brought the indictment to, did not know what was in the indictment, because she's like, I really have time to study this, and it's her indictment. So
She's never tried a criminal case?
yeah, so basically, people that I trust, who are certainly not averse to wanting Jim Comey to go to the Hooskow, almost to a person, say this is one of the most incompetent or ridiculous things they've ever seen. So I was taking it seriously from the broader fact that it seemed pretty clear that Comey did lie before Congress, but that's not what he was indicted on. Now, you can, by the way, do a superseding indictment. They needed to throw an indictment out there to get a grand jury to indict him so that they could meet the statute of limitations. So maybe there could be a superseding indictment. Maybe they can find another way to phrase it. But again, that's technical procedure that I don't really understand.
Yeah, I'll make 2 points also just based on the reporting. The first is that the indictment seems to have happened because some key members of the Trump administration reminded President Trump that this charge was out there and were trying to get President Trump excited and agitated over the fact that Comey had not been indicted and the statute of limitations was approaching. And I thought it was interesting that one of these key members, there are two, one is Ed Martin, who a longtime conservative activist who's now, if you recall, he was appointed interim district attorney, U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, rather. Tom Tillis, the senator outgoing from North Carolina, blocked his appointment, giving us the best U.S. attorney in the history of this nation, Judge Jeanine Pirro, as the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. But nonetheless, Ed Martin was then moved to the DOJ, where he has a kind of vague title. But he's clearly tasked or feels that it's his responsibility to push some of these cases against Trump foes, the people who had attacked Trump, indicted him, litigated against him in the past. But the other person who apparently was behind this rush to indict was Bill Pulte, who is the federal housing official who has made the cases against Lisa Cook and Tish James and Adam Schiff for
on grounds of mortgage,
right, for the
of
dual
tax,
mortgages, right?
Yeah, lying
And so on Bill Pulte, this was kind of under the radar, but it was reported a couple weeks ago in D.C. Bill Pulte has a lot of enemies within the Trump administration, including one of my favorite Trump cabinet members, Scott Bessent. And apparently Bessent challenged Pulte to a fight outside a social club in Georgetown not too long ago. So that gives you a sense of what's kind of going on in the Game of Thrones type Trump court dynamics, leading to what I said last week, and I still feel is his case, is a pretty weak case against Comey. But that leads me to my second point, which is I think that Trump understands an insight that I first learned from our friend Andy McCarthy, which is with lawfare, the process is the penalty. The weakness of the case is really ancillary to the fact that the case has been brought. Because what it means is now Comey is going to have to deal with the legal ramifications of the case. He's going to be arraigned on October 9th, I believe. They're going to have to do pretrial arguments. It's costing Comey. And I think for Trump, that's enough. Even if the case falls apart eventually, he still got his lick or two in against Comey, who has caused him such political and legal pain over the years.
So this is the problem that we face in discussing this, because that's a very, sober assessment, or sort of, let's say, power politics assessment of what Trump is up to. And clearly, I hate to put it this way, but he should not be doing that. And the Republicans should not be doing that, and the White House should not be doing that. And if people have done it intermittently in the past, and certainly it was the case that Trump found himself in the process being the punishment phase of his life in different stages from 2017 to 2024, some from Congress, some from, in terms of the impeachment, at least the first impeachment, some from the Mueller report, which is also, and Congress, then the Jan 6 committee, the various, and so he thinks turnabout is fair play. And the simple fact of the matter is he's too powerful for turnabout is fair play to be a fair way to proceed. He is the president of the United States. He has the power of the presidency behind him. These are not like secret, hidden, deep state actions. We are hearing that he is the one who is directing this. People quitting jobs because they can't fulfill his mandate. They don't, in all conscience, feel that they can fulfill his mandate. Both on, and by the way, we're talking about people who are very conservative, like the person who quit the Eastern District of New York, or the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's job, is a conservative Republican. Danielle Sassoon, who refused to sign off on, who was the sort of acting U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of New York, I think, or was in that position, very conservative, Republican, Federalist Society, like true believer type, said, I can't sign off on this Eric Adams pardon. It doesn't make sense to me, and I can't in good conscience do it. So it's not that, liberals are all blocking his desires. Like, people who have standards can't live by them. And I understand that we live in a world in which the woke right and others are like, do whatever you have to do because this is war, and you have to do it to them when they do it to us. And I still don't think we live, that's not the country that I live in yet. And I find that, this is appalling, and we sort of have to, I think, analyzing it is good, because we understand that Trump is, since he reads the stage directions and he doesn't ever allow anybody to hide behind the hypocrisy of saying, well, we just need to see how this plays out. Obviously, there's cases to be made for and against. The courtroom is really a very good place to adjudicate this. And he's like, no, I want to punish him. So we'll indict, and then the process being the punishment, which is very real and very personal to me. So just give me 90 seconds to tell. My brother-in-law, Elliot Abrams, got hung up in the Iran-Contra affair when he was Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America. And Lawrence Walsh was appointed special prosecutor under different rules, where the special prosecutor was a wildly independent figure with almost no oversight. And 6 weeks before the statute of limitations was going to run out on Elliot's, something that happened with Elliot, he is informed that he is a target of the Walsh investigation, and basically chooses, after agonizing weeks of sleeplessness and all that, to cop a plea to a charge he did not believe was just, to spare his family and me and others the millions of dollars in legal fees it would have cost for him to contest this in court, in a case that he might or might not have lost a circumstance, something that he writes about brilliantly in a book called Undue Process that I commend to everybody's attention. My sister, his wife, my sister Rachel of blessed memory, if you look at Undue Process, there is a part of Undue Process where Eliot republishes a letter that Rachel wrote to her friend Jenny about what it is like to live in this set of circumstances. And she describes how, because somebody or other, one of either Walsh or someone in the Walsh team, was a fan of a specific sports team that was either in the World Series or in the Super Bowl, I can't remember which, she was reduced to rooting with all of her might, passion, and heart against the team, so that at least their enemy would suffer the loss, that this is what she had been reduced to, and the pain, the suffering that she went through, particularly believing that what had happened to her husband was unjust and that he was put in an impossible situation. The process was the penalty. Walsh there was nothing in it for Walsh not to go ahead and punish Eliot for a political difference that he had with him.
I think that's a relevant case. I mean, on a variety of levels, and it's a great book, and it's a wonderful anecdote about your sister Rachel, as painful as it is. I think many people on the conservative side of the aisle, people who have served in Republican administrations, feel as though lawfare has been directed against them asymmetrically for 2 generations now. And whether it's the Iran-Contra scandal, which not only swept up Elliott Abrams, but others as well, investigations into members of the Bush family. Let's not forget the Scooter Libby indictment, which Comey's partner, so to speak, Patrick Fitzgerald, did gratuitously, leading to a lot of suffering on the part of Libby and his family.
We should stop there just for a second to explain that the Scooter Libby case, which involved the question of whether an undercover CIA agent was outed to the press, and that Scooter had done it, Scooter didn't do. In other words, Scooter, it was Richard Armitage, who was Colin Powell's deputy at the State Department, who outed Valerie Plame to, I guess, Robert Novak in 2005. And Fitzgerald got him on a different, saying that he had not had a meeting that he had, or he'd forgotten something on a Thursday that he hadn't done on a Tuesday. But just as in this case, people think that the indictment was, or that Scooter's conviction was for having named an undercover CIA agent. And he wasn't the one who did it. Just as Comey does not seem to have been indicted for the thing that looked to me like the crime, which was perjuring himself before Congress, or at least wasn't charged properly.
Well, one of the charges is obstruction of a. I think isn't one of the charges obstruction of a.
3 charges. There were 3 charges, and the charge relating to the perjury before Congress was not. They did not get the indictment on.
Right. The second, I think, is obstruction of a congressional proceeding, which is kind of adjacent to that.
Right. Yeah.
But look, I mean, this has especially been acute during the Trump years, when you look about the Russia collusion scandal, the lives that were kind of just tossed aside by that. You had this gentleman, Carter Page, being surveyed by his own government on suspicion of being a spy for Russia. There's no proof of any of that. He was caught up in that. Other folks as well. It sidetracked the Trump administration for 2 years in the first term. You've had recent Justice Department investigations of radical Catholics, Catholic traditionalists, surveying churches because of their social views, pro-life activists. And so I think the feeling for many Republicans is that this is turnabout. And after all of the investigations, all of the damage, all of the lawfare that was directed at Trump with the ultimate goal of preventing him from winning the presidency ever again, well, look how it turned out. The danger, of course, as you say, is that this lawfare will turn out the same way as the Democratic lawfare. And we're going to have to be facing the consequences the next time Democrats have control of the federal Justice Department.
I mean, this
Sorry.
raises this larger question about the Trump administration, which is the purpose to be the mirror image of the liberal establishment's persecution, or is it to bring the country to a better place here? Comes from him. If he decides the latter, if he says, my administration is not about being the mirror image of the liberal lawfare and whatever, the base will go along with him. He is clinging to this very dearly, and this all also because don't forget, Comey's so deeply involved in the Russiagate stuff that he can't let go of, and that he has assigned people.
But the weird thing about Comey is that he fired Comey. Like, he actually removed Comey from public life. The Wall Street Journal has a funny thing where it says, "Oh, if only Trump had listened to us and fired him on January 12th, 2017, before he came into office, he could have just, he could have said, I want your resignation. Then none of this would have happened. He didn't listen." But I think the reason that there is one case to be made for doing this, Stephen, though I don't think that you harness the powers of the federal government to prosecute and persecute people in order to do payback. Like, I think that's the federal government is too powerful, and the incentive structure is all off, because the person who is charged has to hire lawyers and pay millions and have his life disrupted, and the charger, meaning the federal government or whoever, that's their job. They don't pay anything. There are no consequences except losing cases. Nothing. But that's one thing. But there is the case that because Bill Clinton in the 90s got wrapped up in a special prosecutor quagmire for 4 years in Whitewater, after 12 years of the misuse of the special prosecutor counsel to go after Ray Donovan and I can't even remember, Ann Gorsuch, the mother of Neil Gorsuch, and a couple of other people, because special prosecutors could not be told not what to do based on how this law had been written. Clinton gets in it. Clinton gets mired in it. There are several prosecutions. The governor of Arkansas was convicted in the Whitewater matter. So it's not like they didn't get scalps, but they finally didn't get Clinton. And I'm bringing this up because the net result was there was a mutual assured destruction truce between Democrats and Republicans, where they ended the special prosecutor law, because it was like, okay, we got hit, you got hit. We can see this is too powerful a tool to be giving people the right to do whatever they wanted with no political supervision and no question as to the cost. And so the special prosecutor law was ended, and new rules were written about how to have these sort of special prosecutors who are actually under Justice Department aegis, so that you could and successfully make the case, if they went too far, that this was a politically motivated prosecution, which in fact happened to help Trump during his third election. So maybe if Trump does this, awful as it is, maybe this is the one path we can get to for the parties to say, we understand that power changes hands. We better do something to defang this process of lawfare, because everyone's going to get caught in it forever. But I sort of think that can't happen. But it did happen once.
It did happen once. It's unlikely to happen as long as Trump is in office.
Right.
I think one of the dangers of the lawfare strategy is that it's adding responsibility to the federal government and the administration at a time when the administration really ought to be focusing on the economy and trying to hedge against a Democratic victory in next year's midterm elections. Because we know that if the Democrats do win the House of Representatives next year, well, they're going to impeach Trump. Trump knows that. That's why they've pursued the Texas gerrymander. That's why Missouri just passed another gerrymander to add a House seat that would be safe Republican. Trump understands that, but I think that any move by this administration that is focused more on Trump's personal agenda and payback is time that could otherwise be spent highlighting either the administration's achievements or addressing the sources of inflation so that inflation goes down further than it already has.
I want to give you credit for two things. Number one, saying Missouri, very exciting. You're
I'm in touch with the heartland, John. I've spent many years.
It's thrilling to hear it pronounced that way here on
Thank
the podcast. And also, I think it is. I think you make an important point, which is that Trump personalizes everything, but he is in a place where, on policy after policy, if you go look at not just polling but sort of lists of things, when it is not about him, the Republicans are far more in touch seem to be far more in touch with the American people and what concerns them than the Democrats are. Crime, having a plan for the economy, even though Trump's numbers on the economy are not good. If you ask people which party has a better plan for the economy, the Republicans score. He pulls it back to himself in a way that is injurious to what we see in the polls, which is that his instincts, including this fight that people in Oregon are picking with him over sending, law enforcement into Portland. It's like, fine, go ahead to, Ron Wyden, the senator, and Tina Kotek, the governor, and all that, say, we don't need you in Portland. And then let's look at the pictures of how half of Portland is boarded up with plywood and how there's literally no commercial renting going on in downtown Portland because no business would be crazy enough to take space in downtown Portland, and see what the images say and what the Democratic counter response is, and then see where that goes. But when Trump decides that what he likes is, I like Brendan Carr trying to suppress the speech of people who are mean to me, and I like it that we're indicting people who are mean to me, I don't think that does him, aside from everything else, I don't think it does him any good. I mean, it may do him psychic good because it's like now they're getting it. You see, they're getting it. But he is not advancing his own case in a way, I think, that is helpful.
There's one aspect where this type of lawfare or Brendan Carr's comments leading to the national crisis of Jimmy Kimmel's 3-day suspension. I don't know how America is going to recover from that, but that is the advantage is it does help the Trump voter coalition. We're so polarized, and Trump is doing not well among independent voters, that sustaining his political strength is really just a function of his overwhelming support among Republicans. And some of these moves, as controversial as they are inside Washington and in the mainstream media are welcomed excitedly by the Trump base. The Trump voters, MAGA, they want payback just as much as Trump does when it comes to the Russia collusion scandal, when it comes to the lawfare against Trump during the Biden years. No one really likes James Comey. Plenty of Democrats don't like Comey either, because Comey's handling of the Hillary Clinton investigations in 2016 arguably helped Trump win the presidency that year. So whether it's fighting with Disney over reactions to Charlie Kirk's assassination, or pressing for indictments against Comey, Tish James, Cook, and others, and not that many people could even identify Lisa Cook, that does kind of help Trump's position within the Republican Party, and he needs those voters because if he loses them, then he would be in substantial political trouble.
I just don't know where they go, and maybe he needs their intensity, but a little of it goes a long way. I understand the idea is fight on all fronts, keep it moving, like just overwhelm them, but so much has been done in that respect, including like the war on the leftist universities, which is just necessary, follows the law, is prudent, is wise, and is helpful. And you maybe dilute the effectiveness of that by throwing a crappy indictment of James Comey on top of it, which then seems, I mean, again, not with the Trump base, but it seems to sort of make the case that he's just going after his enemies, and so the campuses are his enemies, just like Jimmy Kimmel is his enemy, and so it's all personal.
Well, with Trump, we're always testing how much load these circuits can bear. And I think it gets to how you open the show, which is we're often in a position as commentators where we're responding to stories that break every few minutes. You have to kind of read up on them very quickly. You don't always have the full picture because Trump is so hyperactive, and because the Trump administration, this Trump administration in particular, is pressing forward on all fronts. And they're doing so this time with a wealth of experience and knowledge about how the federal government works, which means that they're much more effective in pursuing these wide-ranging policies to push against kind of the liberal monoculture. But you always carry the risk that you break the circuit, that eventually people are just not going to be able to take all of the news, right?
Can I also say, though, but there is this question about effectiveness. I'm not sure they're always so effective. What happened with Jimmy Kimmel? He's back. I know some affiliates are not running them, some are, and I think part of why he's back and why he might endure longer than he would have given just the sort of public and corporate problems with him has to do with the administration strong-arming, threatening. They made him into, excuse me, a hero that he need not have been otherwise. Similarly, maybe, according to Andy McCarthy, this case is so bad it may be worth fighting for Comey because he may be able to sort of clear his name hands down, as opposed to getting it dismissed. So is that effective? I don't know. It's effective in getting under people's skin.
That's what I mean about putting too much into the system. When I say effectiveness, I'm talking about the border. I'm talking about getting the deals with the universities. I'm talking about the rescissions, the spending, all the budget stuff. That's been extraordinarily effective. Right. Like even getting the Fed to cut interest rates, right? I mean, it's an ugly process, but he moved the central bank in the direction he wanted.
Right.
But exactly as you say, when you start getting into peripheral issues, then your energy dissipates.
Right. I mean, look, so maybe we can move on to the boring subject of the possible government shutdown on Wednesday, and the fact there's going to be some kind of meeting in the Oval Office today between the Democrat and Republican leaderships. I am a little confused, frankly, about what's going on here, because in theory, if you, because it's a budget bill, if you can get the House, to hold together, he doesn't need the Democrats.
No,
In
he does.
theory. Why?
No. This is
What
not
am
a
I?
reconciliation bill. This is a
Oh, it's
spending
not. Oh,
bill,
okay.
which requires the
Oh,
60
I'm
vote
sorry.
threshold
Okay.
in the
Okay.
Senate.
Okay. So you
And
see
so
right there. It's very important that you speak, because I
they
just said something
they
stupid.
tested, they tested
Okay.
this with the clean bill of spending, passed the House, as you say,
Right.
without Democratic support, and then only had 54 votes in the Senate last week. The 53 Republicans plus my favorite
John
senator,
Fetterman.
John Fetterman.
Right.
So they need 6 more Democrats. And the question is, will they reach some agreement this afternoon in the Oval Office that will allow 6 more Democrats to come over the aisle and keep the government open?
And as you yourself say in your piece in the Free Press, the dynamic inside the Democratic Party militates against any such deal,
I think
because you
so.
don't. Right. I mean, the calculations are this: Republicans don't care if the government shuts down, and Democrats do, because the people who aren't going to get paid are Democratic, or like overwhelmingly Democratic workers, and they're federal government employees, and the sob story stuff about the closing of the national parks and that sort of thing just doesn't have the oomph that it used to. I think people don't like government shutdowns because they don't like the idea that basically the government doesn't function. It's like, why I have to go to work, like you guys are all sitting there in Washington being jerks to each other, and things aren't, this is what we hire you for. So it's not good for anybody. But Republicans don't care about the good working order of the federal government. Democrats do. And Democrats are laboring under a delusion that if they're the ones who say, I'm not going to sign on to Trump's deal, that the country will, as it did literally 30 years ago with the first major government shutdown of our time, will blame the Republicans. That's their fantasy. Oh my God, that was the greatest moment. 1995, Newt Gingrich shut the government down, and Republicans, never recovered from the national outrage or whatever it was at Republicans doing this to Bill Clinton. It saved Bill Clinton's bacon, though it was just one step on the road back from Bill Clinton's irrelevancy. But that was 30 years ago. And now they're saying, we're going to shut the government down unless you, give us stuff on Obamacare. And I don't think so. And they want to shut the government down because they want to show that they can fight. But then they're the ones whose constituents get hurt. So,
Yeah, it's not a very good situation for the Democrats to be in. And I think the real difference here is Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate. In March, when we had another spending cliff, this is just how we fund the government. We do so intermittently. Schumer decided, I think correctly, that it would be a self-own, so to speak, to shut down the government. And so he voted to keep the government open. The other Democrats, including Democrats from swing states who don't want the government to shut down, went along with him, and the government was open. Schumer became a hate object on the socialist left, and he was trashed as appeasing Trump. We started getting these polls showing him losing to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in a New York Democratic Senate primary in 2028, which is when Schumer is up for re-election. And he got burned by that experience. There's no question about it. So Schumer is a very crafty fellow, or likes to think of himself as crafty. And so he recognized that this time around, he needed to put up more of a fight. And so that's why he's made these demands. Among the demands are renewing Obamacare subsidies that will phase out at the end of the year. These subsidies to Obamacare were authorized by Democrats when they controlled the Congress during the Biden administration. They are, in my view, absurdly generous, subsidizing healthcare insurance premiums on the Obamacare exchange for people making $60,000 a year and higher, which is not the goal, it seems to me, of a welfare state where you want to actually help the people who need it most. But the Democrats want that type of subsidy to continue. But they've also demanded that the Republicans reverse their reforms to Medicaid that were included in the One Big Beautiful Bill, or as we're calling it now, the Working Families Tax Cut. And in addition, Democrats want the Republicans to restore funding cut to USAID and all of its woke programming. So USAID is not getting its funding back. The Medicaid changes are going to remain the same. The question is, do Republicans give a little on these Obamacare subsidies, which, of course, affect people in red states just as much as blue states? And it seems to me that there is a path here. Schumer can have a big fight, and he can say at the very last minute, sometime later tonight, the Republicans have agreed to have a standalone process over these Obamacare subsidies by the end of the year. This is a huge win. We're not going to let middle-class Americans suffer. And in response, I'll allow the government to remain open. That's there. There are some Democrats like Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, who's retiring, who have said this is the way to approach the issue. It will be a real test of Schumer's, I think, fear of the socialist left to see if that's enough for him. And if it's not, if he feels he has to go even further, as you say, then we'll have a shutdown, which will be terrible for the Democrats, because not only are they not going to get what they want on the spending side, the administration has already drawn up plans to reduce the federal workforce even further in the event of a shutdown, meaning the Democrats aren't going to only lose on policy, they're going to lose on personnel, because most of these bureaucrats, not all, most, are Democratic voters and supporters.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the other point about this is that the one thing that is arguable here in terms of a certain level of fairness, not that I still oppose the existence of Obamacare, and you're saying the subsidies are too generous, but if I understand this correctly, this is a way of handling the problem of people who do not get employer mandated health insurance, right? So, those of us who get employer health insurance get a 7% subsidy basically from our employer. We pay 7%, the employer pays 7%, 14% goes to Medicare. And so if you don't have an employer, if you're self-employed, you don't get that 7%. And this is to sort of make that, to level the playing field between the self-employed and the employed by somebody else world. And that's an arguable proposition. Like, that's something that Trump could come up with a defense of. The Medicaid stuff, which was just simply a handout, is a way of just providing money to people because, it started out as a COVID era subsidy, and now they just want to, they want it restored forever as a kind of another new form of welfare. Not really arguable, except if you're, that's when the Democrats are saying things like, we've lifted 60 million people out of poverty with these Medicaid subsidies. And it's like, that's not how you lift people out of poverty, by handing them taxpayer money that's yeah, I understand if that's how you think the world works, but I just think that the deal that you're talking about is one that oddly enough Republicans can kind of defend.
Yeah.
Also because of red state, also because they have constituents.
Yeah. I mean, they would probably renew them at a lower level,
Yeah.
but they would still renew them. They know that healthcare is an issue in a midterm election. It seems to me there's a reasonable course to follow, but Schumer and the Democrats are in the grips of the left wing demand to fight Trump, no matter the cost.
Can we talk about this a little bit? And Abe, I'm interested in your perspective on this. I'm not on Blue Sky, which is the leftist Twitter, or the leftist alternative to Twitter. I'm not a member. I don't see it. Can't really see it unless you're a member. You can only become a member if you're like invited. Anyway, I'm not on it. And but I gather that what's interesting about it is that it is a look at the Democratic id, the way the Twitter is a look at the American id. And yesterday, apparently, there was a huge controversy because Ezra Klein, who has somehow now become some, in their eyes, in the eyes of the Democratic, of the sort of socialist left, some kind of apostate neocon monster, which trust me, he isn't. For the second time in a couple of months, apparently had a conversation with Ta-Nehisi Coates, the most ridiculous major intellectual figure of our time. And they had some disagreement about how the Democrats should proceed if they want to win elections. And it was apparently very polite and very civil. And Blue Sky basically decided that Ezra Klein should be sent to the gulag. I mean, apparently it was just like a 12-hour hate on Ezra Klein. And what I'm struck by this, because this kind of happened to Republicans during the first Obama years on Twitter and on social media, where they whipped each other into a frenzy, particularly about the first debt ceiling crisis and one of the government and a couple of the government shutdowns, in which your failure to go along with the idea that they should fight and you should go over the debt cliff, and because otherwise you're just giving in to Obama and all of that. If you didn't say that, as I didn't, you were just abused. Like you would just get heaped with abuse, and you're a cuck, and you're a rhino, and you're everything. You're terrible, and you're a monster. And there's a disciplinary effect, without question. Like, people aren't used to being attacked like that, particularly if they're got 300 followers or something. And then and so you kind of like get in line. And the Democrats now have this very efficient little world in which they are functioning almost exclusively in their own ecosystem, and the purpose of which is to establish the line that you are not supposed to cross. And if you cross it, oh boy, are you going to get it. And I know that Trump won in 2016, got through 3 states and all that, but that wasn't that helpful to him when some of that came after anti-Trump people. I don't think that's what got him elected or anything. Comey got him elected, really. But do you think, Democrats unable to get out of their own increasingly crazy ecosystem?
I don't know. I agree with you about it, the mirror version of it not being particularly effective for Trump. But I think what it is effective in doing on both sides is pushing the political culture of both the left and the right to maximalist positions. And this relates to our first half of our discussion about testing the system and pushing a revenge agenda, that has gotten both sides to stop considering what happens next, what happens after you push your maximalist cause. And I think that is, this this has created this vicious cycle, obviously, on both sides. I think Ezra Klein wants to sort of bring it back into the 40-yard lines. I don't. I think he's right. Obviously right in the sense that the way Democrats are moving forward is ineffective. I don't think his abundance agenda is going to be any more effective. I think that's a separate issue and a mistake. But yeah, it's isn't Twitter kind of like that for on the right now still? I mean, I get dumped on day and night for and you know, and
Yeah,
I
look,
support Trump on 9 billion things.
everybody
Yeah,
jumps on everybody
yeah,
on Twitter and on social
No,
media.
I do think it's funny that, Ezra Klein is being demonized and tarred and feathered by the left for standing for such, you know, awful positions as abundance and, not celebrating the assassination in public of a 31-year-old. I mean, that to me shows the degree to which the Democratic base has just spiraled off into a loony left land.
I'm the problem is we only get judgments every 2 years. We're speculating about things here, and a lot of this, maybe special elections resolve it a little bit in the interim between the major national elections. But we're speculating on the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of X, Y, and Z. And we really only know when the voters get a chance to speak. So atmospherically, you have these two worlds in which Democrats think that the country is becoming Nazi Germany, and they really do believe it. And they really genuinely, and they're not like, oh, get off it. Like, they really believe it. They've been advancing this case. It doesn't help that there are people working in the administration who talk about things and in ways that do not sound do not sound like the voices of people in a coexisting republic with differing views and that sort of thing. But they really believe this. It has so there is no limiting effect on their arguments, because in the effort to stop the coming of Nazism, all means need to be at least explored to do that. And it's just interesting to me that you have these moments where suddenly Democratic or American politics reassert themselves, like, oh, the government's going to shut down on October 1st. So what you need to do is do some horse trading and figure out, who's going to get what and who's not going to get what. And you're not going to get the Genghis Khan victory of, hearing the lamentations, seeing their bodies before you and hearing the lamentations of their women. That's not how it happens. You don't get full defeats in a country in which the House is controlled by one party by 3 or 4 seats out of 435 seats. You might get that when you control the Senate, as Lyndon Johnson did, by 79 or 69 seats or something in 1965, but you can't get it now. And everybody is like, nobody is. There are these moments when they're going to have to make a deal. At some point there'll be a deal. Even if they shut it down, there'll have to be a deal. I mean, at some point there has to be a deal. So the general proposition has been, make the deal before the crisis happens, because you don't know what, as a prophylactic, you don't know what the crisis is going to do to you. So you know what? It's like too risky not to make the deal. Take whatever lumps when people say you suck, and then go on.
My general attitude is shutdowns don't really matter all that much politically. However, the side that wants the government to remain open wins the messaging war over the shutdown. And in this case, the Republicans want the government to remain open. They're the ones arguing for just give us the votes, we'll keep the government open, and then we'll argue about this other stuff later. Right. It's Democrats who, because they're in the grip of the anti-Trump frenzy, and because Chuck Schumer wants to keep his options open to run for re-election in 2028, may say, shut it down.
You know, it's a weirdness about Schumer and 2028, if that's really what the issue is, because I think that there is a generational age revolt inside the Democratic Party that Schumer. I don't think these 80-year-old Democrats are going to survive over the next 4 or 5 years. All of the motion and passion in the party is relatively youthful and relatively revolutionary, and will organize and move in primaries. And one of the things that is implicit is everybody's too old. They're all old. They're all too old. And if I were Schumer, I would think I'm gonna retire, and I should like Gene Shaheen. That should give me a little freedom of motion. Now, maybe he thinks he needs to cater to these people because they are the future of the party, and he does, and you have to cater.
Schumer was elected to the House in 1980.
Right.
This is all he knows. It's all he's ever going to want to do.
Yeah. Well, okay, but that's, he's 74 now, so he'll be 77 then. And yeah, okay, so Chuck Grassley is 91, and you can do this. It's just that it's now become explicit on the Democratic side. It's one of the messages about Zoran Mamdani is that he's half the age of Andrew Cuomo. We haven't even talked about that. Let me just say quickly, Eric Adams, of course, announced he wasn't, he was withdrawing from the election. Don't nobody get excited. Adams is getting 5 to 6% of the vote. Mamdani is 20 points ahead of Cuomo. Cuomo is the worst retail politician, one of the worst retail politicians in our lifetimes, a guy who won elections in spite of his unbelievable ham-handedness as a candidate for office, and who twice lost races that he should have won because of his boneheaded mistakes. So he's got like 5 weeks to make up 20 points, and maybe a Bill Clinton could do it, but I don't think an Andrew Cuomo can do it in any way, shape, or form. But it is the implicit message. It's like, you're all old men, you're all tired, you're all out of touch, you didn't stop Trump, you're all a bunch of losers, and let's bring in the guy who hates Jews and wants to make buses free, because why the hell not? And that's, I think, a nation. That's not just New York City. Seems to be a nationwide feeling. It's at least as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, I got all these texts of people were suddenly enthused, oh, here it is. See, it's starting to, something's going to happen. And of course, I'm with you. I mean, Cuomo belongs to another time. It wasn't that long ago, but it is another time nonetheless.
He belongs to a time when you can lie about sending people into nursing homes and them dying, and then you getting praised because you were an anti-Trump. And people came to hate him in New York. That's why he ended up resigning his governorship and then having this money left over that he could run for office with. And then he blew that in the primary, ran a banned primary, and now so to have no hope.
Yeah.
It's the commentary message, have no hope. Mamdani is coming, and you should just know, as I say this, that it's Abe and I who are going to be paid. Matt is sitting there, happy in Virginia. Abe and I are literally living in the heart of we're going to be living in the belly of the beast, and I'm just being realistic about.
Yeah. So for
the options here,
we have this is the last few months where things are just bad.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I mean, and they're going to be bad in very weird ways.
Yes.
I mean, that's the
I have a recommendation if you want
great.
one. I'd like to recommend for viewers of a certain age a book called Madden and Summerall: How They Revolutionized NFL Broadcasting by the sports writer Rich Podolsky. It's a entertaining little book. You can get through it pretty quickly, describing the relationship between John Madden, Raiders coach, color commentator, and Pat Summerall, the play-by-play broadcaster, and how they came together in the 1980s, how they sustained the partnership on the air for about 20 years. In my view, the best sportscasting team ever to have talked into the microphones. And you get some very interesting trivia about the two of them, including the fact that before he was teamed up with Madden, Summerall was thinking of leaving broadcasting and running for the U.S. Senate from Florida as a Republican, which, of course, those of us who
What
are
a
aware
surprise.
that Pat
Yes,
Summerall's
because
daughter is Susie Wiles, President Trump's chief of staff. This makes a lot of sense. So Summerall, very complicated man, amazing broadcaster, but he was definitely a conservative Republican, like his daughter, Susie. You also learn that despite having an incredible rapport on camera, Madden and Summerall were not actually that close off camera. So they were friendly. It wasn't as though they were enemies or anything, but they really kind of had their own social circles. And then finally, one reason to enjoy the book is that you get a lot of great John Madden anecdotes. Just Madden, such a larger-than-life figure, driving across the country in the big bus that he used to cover NFL games because he hated to fly. But when he would make these long trips, he lived in California, Northern California, but often had to go to New York for Giants games or NFL headquarters. They would stop at random places, weird museums you see on Route 66, or the world's largest bull somewhere in Nebraska. And of course, people knew who he was because the NFL really is one of the last unifying forces in American culture. And you also get a great, taste of Madden. Madden retires in 2004. He announced his retirement, and it was a shock to me, among other people. Or maybe it was 2006, so around that time. Because he was doing fine. He really spent the last 15 years of his life kind of just out of sight until right before he died in the 2021, the NFL put together a documentary called All Madden, which is a great film on its own, and which includes Madden's reactions to watching people talk about him and his impact on the sport of professional football. And then he died then in December of 2021, right after that. So if you're a fan of John Madden, beyond the video game series that carries his name, and if you were a fan of Madden and Summerall, I recommend this new book by Rich Podolsky.
I've been watching a lot of football. My son got interested in football again. I've been watching a lot of football, and I'm just struck, as I have been for the last 20 years as I've intermittently watched football, at how, comparatively speaking, inept and uninteresting both the play-by-play guys, Summerall being the play-by-play guy, and the color people, that being Madden. By comparison, it's weird because I'm not sentimental. I don't think Vin Scully was that great. I hate sentimentality about broadcasters. But in the course of my life, there have been like three, and from what I can tell, three genuinely great broadcasters in this regard. Or four. So Madden and Summerall as a team. Tim McCarver, when he revolutionized the analysis of baseball, and then after a while he got annoying, but he would just, he was going to say he's going to throw an 83 mile an hour slider here, and see if it can just miss the plate a little bit, and that's exactly what would happen. Terry Bradshaw, who was also a color guy on, I guess he's still there at
Well, he does the studio show,
he does the
right?
studio show. Okay. Madden didn't have retired in part because he literally made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, off the video game that was named for him. I mean, and in fact, there is a movie being made with the weirdest casting in American history. Nicolas Cage is playing John Madden in a movie directed by David O. Russell, with Christian Bale playing Al Davis, who was the owner of the Oakland Raiders, the crazy owner of the Oakland Raiders. This is a very bizarre piece of casting. Nicolas Cage, of course, John Madden was like a bear, a mountain and a bear of a man. And there's Nicolas Cage, who was kind of, like, that's not how he comes across. Anyway, he is a good actor, so it'll be very interesting to see what happens. But it is fascinating that I think Madden and Michael Jordan are the two most financially successful figures in American sports. And Madden, people don't really quite fathom how much money that game, which still exists.
That's a good point, because they're different. Jordan, you want to be like Mike, but with Madden, you just like John Madden.
Yeah.
But the key to his appeal, maybe he's a great football player, he's a great coach, but the key to his appeal, once he started getting into commercials, I think he started doing beer commercials. That was the first, in his way into TV, was just, he was this person that everyone seemed to be able to relate to and enjoy. And there are very few people who are able to communicate those attributes through the medium of television. And yes, it made him insanely wealthy.
And he, the other thing about him that I thought was relatable was this thing where, he was this great NFL coach and he quit very young because he was like, this is going to kill me. This is too hard. Like, my heart can't take this. The intensity level here is just so awful. And then just like he quits this thing that he is one of the 2 or 3 best people at in the country. And then he goes and does something at which he is unreservedly the best person ever to do it. That's a pretty amazing feat also, to have your second career make you, sort of like almost outshine your earlier career that gave you all the wisdom that you could then impart in the second career. I'm looking forward to that. It kind of
happens a lot in the U.S. these days, though. Especially because in media, certainly, you could be a rock star and then be a bigger reality star.
Yeah.
Well,
it's like the famous truth, which is the pithiest line in American cultural history is also the least true ever, which is that F. Scott Fitzgerald said, there are no second acts in American lives. And the truth is that there are only second and third and fourth and fifth acts in American lives. Like, it was, he was a drunk and he died young and he was disappointed in the second half of his own life. But, if he'd gotten off booze, he could have ended up writing great memoirs or becoming a whatever, right? More, it's like America is the only place in the world in which people have multiple lives.
Look at our president.
Not for Cuomo.
And look at our president. Our president is the ultimate example of
right.
it. But
3 acts. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like, it's crazy. Anyway, America gives everybody chances. That's all you can ask of a country, even though we no longer think that means much of anything, and we should, but we don't. See you tomorrow. Oh, by the way, of course, we will be off. Just to a programming note, we will of course be off on Thursday for Yom Kippur, but we will be doing the rest of the week. And for Matt and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.